The Nintendo 64 was a top-tier console of the 90s. It was home to legendary games like Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which is still considered the best game according to Metacritic. But even though N64 games don't look great by today's standards, the console packs a bunch of power that even newer consoles would cry for. We'll take a closer look at exactly how in this episode of Tech Inside. A couple of months ago I covered the power of the PlayStation 3 here on this channel, and now it's the Nintendo 64's turn. And the N64 also has a ton of power. It's just so that not everyone saw that. Yes, in the late 1990s, video games were all about 3D worlds, with the aim of breaking free from the 2D world. That's how Nintendo marketed the N64. They had to do it because everyone was eagerly watching to see what kind of console Nintendo would come up with. There had been the debate with Sony and the SNES CD drive, but then Nintendo partnered with Silicon Graphics for the technology behind the Ultra 64, which was the development name. Silicon Graphics, or SGI, was a highly respected company at the time when it came to 3D animation and high-performance workstations, which started at around $15,000. You can think of SGI as Nvidia today, but with the difference that SGI didn't really sell to the average consumer, which Nvidia does. But with Nintendo as partner, they were able to develop the N64, and which was more superior with what the competition had to offer, and still were able to manage to sell it for $250. The result was then two processors for the N64. Yes, I said two processors, since the graphics chip is referred to as a coprocessor. Both chips were clocked at around 100 MHz for the CPU and 63 MHz for the graphics chip, and they truly represent the pinnacle of console gaming. Sega with its Saturn didn't really hold up with the N64, and even Sony with its PlayStation couldn't hold a candle to the N64, because, as the console's name suggests, both chips are 64-bit processors, something that nobody had even thought of about in 1997, and was actually intended for supercomputers up until then. Other manufacturers like AMD or Apple didn't have 64-bit processors until 2003, such as the famous AMD Athlon 64 or the G5 chip in the Power Mac G5. And having a 64-bit processor in 1997 was truly a strong selling point. Nintendo itself claimed that this would theoretically allow them to skip a console generation. Okay, but at some point we need to take a step back, because they still wanted to sell the console for $250. So they need to cut back some of the features, which really held back the full potential of the processors inside the N64. First, let's talk about memory. Yes, it's a big issue nowadays, but back then it was too. Then it built 4 MB of RAM into the N64, which was decent for the time, but the implementation was a disaster. Both the graphics card and the CPU share the memory, which isn't bad as it's similar on how it works on current MacBooks, but the memory has a huge latency. And every processor or graphics card also has a cache, which is a small, super fast memory, even faster than the main memory. But even the cache was limited to 4 KB on the N64, which prevented many developers from loading detailed graphics into it. That's why some games look so blurry in the textures. More on that later. And that's why many developers prefer to load textures from the game cartridge itself, since this didn't have the latency of the main memory. It wasn't exactly the most elegant solution, but at least it allowed for nice textures on the N64. Oh, and the expansion pack, which doubled the console's memory, didn't help much either. Think of the N64 like this. You have a car with a big engine inside it that puts out 500 horsepower, but the gas tank is tiny and you have to refuel after just 100 meters. And the expansion pack was like an extra gas can that you never used because the gas station had to be nearby if you wanted to load large textures from the cartridge. Well, the hype of the N64 was pretty large, but the console was held back with the few drawbacks of the processors and everything around it. And well, after researching all of this, I now understand why Nintendo put in cartridges for the N64 instead of a CD format. Everyone heavily criticized Nintendo for not including a CD drive in the N64, which meant that the cartridges couldn't store as much data as a CD. But these days there are devices like the EverDrive, so storage is no longer an issue by N64 standards. It's possible to render large open world environments that look detailed even from a distance and aren't scaled down. That's the approach with current consoles. When there's an open world, everything in the distance has lower details, so it doesn't require much processing power. Here with the N64, that's not a problem. Everything in the open world can be rendered. Well, let's keep in mind that this console was released in the 90s. And open world games like that did release sporadically on the PC side, or even on competing platforms like the PlayStation. But it wouldn't be really a fun, I think, and there are probably not that many open world games available for the PlayStation. And well, even if it did, it would require a ton of loading because of the CD format and the small RAM size of the PlayStation, and yeah, that would be a pain. But many people still questioning in this video, which I dropped in the video, the question, why some N64 games look that blurry? Well, we know that while the RAM is fast, it takes a while to deliver data directly. And that the graphics chip's cache was very small, which is why some textures look so blurry. To make matters worse, most games run at a resolution of 240p. Which looks a little bit like this here. But Nintendo applied a anti-aliasing filter on top of that. Sure, back in the CRT era, it hardly mattered. But today with our 65-inch 4K OLED monsters, you can really see that all the consoles look a bit off on them. The PlayStation 1 looks good with an OSS-C, but the OSS-C can't handle the blurry visuals of the N64 at all. That's because the N64 does anti-aliasing at a hardware level for all games, and you can't just turn it off. A quick explanation on what anti-aliasing is. On modern system, it lets you smooth out and soften an image that's a bit pixelated. This works perfectly for HD or Full HD scenes, but at 240p it just turns into a mush that the N64 outputs. With its successor, the GameCube, Nintendo made sure that there were no more limitations to the platform and that development on the GameCube was easier. After all that, the N64 was held back with the huge memory limitations, cartridges and strict rules on how to develop games for the N64. But I know where no strict rule is. Please subscribe down there for more content like this. And I'm trying to get back on some content here on this channel. And well, I think that's everything for this video, and then we'll see us in the next video. Bye for now.